The League of Women Voters of Monterey County is pleased to welcome Dr. Daisy Martin from the University of California, Santa Cruz to talk to us about civics, empowering citizens by teaching rights, responsibilities, and how government works. We all took civics at some time in school. We had to learn the basic parts of government, the important leaders in history, the statistics, and the facts of our government. Does anybody remember having to memorize all the state capitals? Some of us had to pass tests to earn citizenship status. We all learn a bit more about civics by engaging in voter education, voter registration, and helping with the process of electing representatives. Professor Martin has supported these activities as the founder of History and Civics Project at UC Santa Cruz. She works with K-12 teachers of history and of civics. She has also taught in public schools. She is a member of the Monterey County Media Literacy Coalition. She thinks that civics education overlaps with the League of Women Voters' mission to educate voters, and she has expertise in historical reading. We look forward to refreshing our own civics education with her help. I am pleased to introduce Dr. Daisy Martin.
Oh, thanks so much, Dennis. Thanks for that nice introduction, and thank you all for being here. And thanks to Bev for the initial invite. This title actually comes from the first time Bev and I spoke about me visiting with you, which she said, we want to know what's happening so that young people are informed voters. And that seems to me to be a good question, which I'll try to answer, at least give you some of the landscape of what's happening both in the state and nationally. And I also just want to say that the League of Women Voters, it's been an organization that I knew of when I was tiny. And it is also an organization that when I work with teachers, like this fall, when we worked on teaching elections, I give them the link to the League of Women Voters site because it's a good place to get information about what's happening in that particular election. So thank you for doing the work. And I love that you're looking for actionable items because that is a theme of civics education today, informed action, and that can encompass all kinds of things. So I'm going to start with the vote. And on the left, you see a sticker that was designed by the League of Women Voters in California, and maybe you handed those out in the fall. And on the right, you see one of the student winners of the sticker contest in Michigan, and they made kid stickers, and that was one of the winners, and people wore those proudly. And we know that the vote is core to our democracy, to our country, to our localities, etc. And we know that it's been a hard fought battle for multiple groups. So I noticed that your memberships come in like different names of suffragettes who fought for the 19th Amendment, right, which made it possible for women to vote. And this is a picture of advocates in 1917 in front of the White House saying, votes for women now. But the first mention in the Constitution of the vote is Article 15, right, which was passed after the Civil War. And you probably all remember this amendment, which says the right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. Section 2 is about the Congress, the national level, shall have the power to enforce this article by appropriate legislation. So this is obviously passed initially to allow formerly enslaved men to vote. And when it was passed, its import was recognized by multiple people around the country, including the president, Ulysses S. Grant, who said, I repeat that the adoption of the 15th Amendment to the Constitution completes the greatest civil change and constitutes the most important event that has occurred since the nation came into life. So here we have the importance of the vote. And Lottie Rollins, who was a suffragette in South Carolina, took it further. She did not receive this vote, right? Because she was a woman. She said, we ask suffrage not as a favor, not as a privilege, based on the grounds that we are human beings and as such entitled to all human rights. So the vote as a human right, as core to our democracy, has been a theme, at least since the 15th Amendment, if not sooner. But one of the things about the 15th Amendment is its wording has impacted how suffrage, the right to vote, has been interpreted and executed, and debated over time. Because you notice that the 15th Amendment says, it shall, the highlighted pieces say, it shall not be denied or abridged by the United States on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. So this is what it won't be denied on, but it doesn't, it opens the possibility that it can be denied, right? So here is a bit about the passing of this amendment, which was vigorously debated. And Congress spent the days between President Grant's election and his inauguration drafting the 15th Amendment, this new amendment. The writers of the 15th Amendment produced 3 different versions of the document. The first of those prohibited states from denying citizens the vote because of their race, color, or the previous experience of being a slave. So that's the one we just saw. The second version prevented states from denying the vote to anyone based on literacy, property, or the circumstances of their birth. So that has a different list of what you can't deny it on the basis of. But the third one was very different. The third version stated plainly and directly that all male citizens who were 21 or older had the right to vote. That is what political scientists call an affirmative right to vote. Rather than what can it be denied upon, it's more who has it. And I'm going to share this is from 2020, but this is a professor of political science at Ohio State University, and she works at the study of democratic politics. And she says we need an affirmative right to vote, which would be, instead of saying what it can be denied on, it says these are the people who have the right to vote. And so this wording of the 15th Amendment, which is, we have students investigate those 2 lines to see the impact, has meant it's been part of one of it's partly responsible for why we have these struggles over suffrage and they continue. So we see that in our contemporary political realm with questions about voter ID, with questions about gerrymandering, and the list goes on. And we've seen it a lot in the last sort of 3 presidential elections, right? This struggles over suffrage about who's going to get to vote, how are they going to get registered, etc. And we also saw it in the past. So that 15th Amendment gets passed, and at the top, you see how many Black voters participated in the presidential elections in some key Southern states in 1876, which was the first presidential election after the 15th Amendment. And then you see it going down within however many years that is, for 8 years. In 8 years, we've got fewer Black voters going to the election, going to the polls. We also, I'm sure you remember that, like I put the grandfather clause in there, states start passing laws that say, hey, if your grandpa didn't vote, you can't vote. They start passing poll taxes. On the lower right, you see an Oklahoma poll tax you got to pay. On the left, you see sites of violence that are intimidating Black voters from going to the polls. So even while the 15th Amendment said, hey, if you were a formerly enslaved man, you can get to the polls, we see the voting really go down given multiple factors. So Struggles over suffrage is one of the ways that we frame learning about the vote and learning about elections. Um, but I want to now go to the uplifting part, um, which so in one of the things that I know that you all work on is registering people to vote. And Stacey Abrams, who maybe you recognize from her work, like she ran for governor, right? And but also has been a political activist and scholar. And this is a quote from Stacey Abrams that she's citing some research. She says, "We know that third party registration is essential for getting low income and communities of color to register to vote because they will not register unless they're asked because the process seems too complicated and fraught with peril." And here, what she's talking about, the third party registration, is those booths at the grocery store where somebody says, "Hey, have you registered? What are the can I help you register?" The door to door that people do, the going into classrooms and explaining to students how registration works. And in California, right, you can pre-register as a 16-year-old. And so here, she's basically and if we looked at the longer piece, it would have the research that shows that third party registration is important to turning out the vote, and having everyone who is eligible take that responsibility seriously and make it happen. Um, in working with the other, here's the California registrar's website. And we encourage teachers to take their students. And I used to do this. I taught when we also just brought in the long registration forms, and I would bring them into my government students and show them how it works. But one of the great things about the California registrar's site is that you can find all kinds of information here. And the screenshot that I took here shows you that you can get it in multiple languages. So you can send students and adults to the actual government site, and they can learn about how to register, and they can learn about the propositions, they can learn about all kinds of things, and they can do it in their own language. And so again, um, helping students as well as some adults understand that you don't have to, like, this is accessible through the internet at your local library, and you don't have to know a lot. It will walk you through it. And so making it more accessible. Um, Now, in California, our ballots are filled with people and propositions, right? And those propositions can be very hard to understand. Um, so we know this website actually has some breakdowns. And if you've got the hard copy, right, you all are familiar with, like, there's both short summaries and then arguments. There's all kinds of information to help you understand the propositions. But I want to give you a picture of what one relatively local, it's not in Monterey County, but Watsonville High has done in the past, where they have seniors who take a proposition, and in small groups, they figure out how they can tell their community what it would do and what it might mean for their community. And they do a pros and cons, and they don't take a position on the proposition. They get it. They basically make sense of it to then explain it to their community. And here they're having a night where they've invited their adults and the community to learn about the ballot propositions. So this is, this is civic action, right? I'm going to help inform my community. So I wanted to start with the vote. I didn't know that in my lifetime it would become there would be so many struggles over this. I kind of thought some of them were resolved. But we also know, and I kind of was like, well, the vote is important, but all these other things are important too. But I've had to kind of go back and go like, well, we need to focus on the vote as well. And so in California, we also, we think about civics, and nationally, we think about civics as including more than the vote, right? Even while it is fundamental and essential. So I'm going to take us to the California context for civic education, and then I'll do national, and then I'll bring us back to California. Um, So here, let me just, there we go. So in California, education is, there are guiding documents that are both state standards and state frameworks, and they go through a process and then they become the guide for teachers about what they do in their classrooms. So in the California History Social Science Framework, which I think is 2016, um, there was a shift to focus on citizenship more. There were four shifts: inquiry, citizenship, literacy, and another one, new content as well. But and when I talk about citizenship, I'm really talking about members of community. I'm not talking about a legal status. Um, so um, in the California Historical Framework, History Social Science Framework, it says that civics includes multiple things. A high quality civic education addresses all four components at all grade levels. All grade levels. It's supposed to happen K-12 and builds on skills and knowledge from one grade level to the next. So it is supposed to be happening at every grade level. And Bev, in her written introduction about civics, named three aspects. These overlap with what she named, but there's foundational content, there's knowledge, there's how, what are checks and balances, right? What is the power of the purse? These things we wish more Americans understood. Then there's cognitive skills. There's ways of, if you are going to investigate an issue, how do you assess its origins and its perspective? There's participatory skills. How do you think, how do you act, and how do you decide how to act? And then there's dispositions and motivations. Like, do we care about the collective as well as our individual, goals, etc. Are we motivated? Are students motivated to be involved in their communities at whatever level? So it kind of splits it up. And then I'm going to give you some more words. This is also how California has defined civics. And bear with me, it's kind of a long piece, but civics is in part the study of how people participate in governing society. In a constitutional democracy, productive civic engagement requires knowledge of the history. So I started with some history because history has always been associated with civics. And in 1892, they were writing about how history trains political judgment. But so it requires knowledge of the history, principles, and foundations of our American democracy, and the ability to participate in civic and democratic processes. People demonstrate civic engagement when they address public problems individually and collaboratively, and when they maintain, strengthen, and improve communities and societies. Thus, civics is in part the study of how people participate in governing society, because government is a means for addressing common or public problems. The political system established by the U.S. Constitution is an important subject of study within civics. Civics requires other knowledge too. Students should learn about states and local governments, markets, courts, legal systems, civil society, other nations' systems and practices, international institutions, and the techniques available to citizens for preserving and changing a society. It goes on to say that civics is not limited to the study of politics and society. It also encompasses participation in classrooms and schools, neighborhoods, groups, and organizations. What defines civic virtue? Which democratic principles apply in given situations? And when discussions are deliberative, are not easy questions, but they are topics for inquiry and reflection. In civics, students learn to contribute appropriately to public processes and discussions of real issues. Their contributions to public discussions may take many forms, ranging from personal testimony to abstract arguments. They will also learn civic practices such as voting, volunteering, jury service, joining with others to improve society. Civics enables students not only to study how others participate, but also to practice participating and taking informed action themselves. So that's a lot. And I think it's worthy and important. But remember that there is a lot teachers are supposed to teach. So whether this all happens, but it's important to understand that the state of California has said this is what we think civics is. And we at the History and Civics Project try to support teachers in doing some of these things. California has also identified six proven practices for high quality civic learning. And this means by proven that there is research that shows that these matter to students' civic dispositions or knowledge or participatory skills. These are taking courses. Yes. Deliberation of current and controversial issues. Service learning, student-led voluntary associations. If you're familiar with schools, in the area, there'll be a lot of different kinds of organizations at a school where students are doing this extracurricularly. Simulations of democratic processes. So I almost put a picture in here of the mock trial, which is going strong here in Santa Cruz County, but their students are participating in a mock trial. You also see simulated elections, things like that. And student voice in schools. Schools that uplift student voice, encourage student voice. To the right, you see some expanded practices that are recommended. Prioritizing equity and lived experiences, civic media literacy, which I'm going to come back to, social emotional learning, school climate reform, and action civics, which is also action civics is what you saw in the community night for propositions. That's the final action is that community night. So let me move from California just to give you a sense of how representative California is in the nation. So in the nation, there are 31 states of 50 that require a one-semester high school civics course. So we are one of them, one of 31 states. 6 require a full year course. So they are in the minority. And then that means that it's 50 minus 37. So 13 states might require some civics instruction, but don't have a civics requirement for graduation or require a specific course. Now, sometimes that's because they're local control. And so it doesn't mean that a district within that state might not require that. At the middle school level, right, which is grades 6 through 8, 5 states require a civics course. California does not have a civics course in middle school. They do talk about including civics in the history curriculum, and there are 3 history classes in middle school. 25 states require some forms of civic instruction, and in 20 states, no civics instruction is mandated. So it's not as widespread or as required as we would all like it to be. I'm editorializing, but and then at the national level, and this is true at the state level too, there are relatively new, there are, the internet has made it so you can share resources for teachers and for districts and for educators quite easily. And this is an initiative called Educating for an American Democracy, and it has both lessons. It created a roadmap for what excellence would look like in terms of history and civics. This was an effort of multiple professional organizations, scholars, and teachers. And it was designed to say, hey, if you're going to teach democracy, what can we do both policy-wise and in the classroom to support you? At the national level, so this is what I would call, this does include some policy, but it's also got curriculum. And there are other sites like this, but this one is the sort of a huge effort that gathered resources from all around the country. But I would also point at the national level, Civex Now, which History and Civics Project is a partner of Civex Now. This is a national cross-partisan coalition of over 360 organizations which are focused on improving our nation's K-12 in and out of school civic education. So when we started in 2018, the History and Civics Project, we immediately partnered with these folks. And it's actually some of the forces that were behind starting this come from iCivics, which is a small I, but iCivics is an organization that was started by former Supreme Court Justice Sandra Day O'Connor when she retired. I think it was when she retired. Maybe it was in the last years of when she was on the court. She said, we need more civics ed. And that organization, iCivics, has 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 flourished, has lots of curriculum, but they also do, and as History and Civics Project, we don't do advocacy work because we are funded by the state and the national government as well as outside funders. But Civics now has an advocacy arm, which is working on getting more support for teachers to do this, thinking about policies, speaking out against policies that don't support civic ed. And there have been some federal grant programs that are focused on civics, but I think that they are some that have been removed in the last few days. So that's one national organization, Civics Now. And one of the things that Civics Now is also involved in is this Civic Learning Week, which comes up in March. And this, if you went to this website, you would see there's not that many events yet, but there are multiple weeks during the year that they do these national things of like everybody do civics during these weeks. So that's some of the national. I will give you one more piece of the national landscape, which is now California doesn't, students don't take any kind of exam in history, social science, or civics. They have in the past, and that exam has looked different at different times, but they don't anymore. But at the national level, there is something you may have heard of, which is the NAEP test, and it is a national test where it's randomized across the nation and it's periodic. And they started testing civics at the 8th grade level. I don't know, maybe 10, 15 years ago. And and you can go examine some of the results that they've been finding. The latest results are from 2022. I would and so they're testing 8th graders. It's a 60-minute test, and they have different kinds of questions. One kind of question is this kind, which is what we might call a selected response or multiple choice. And this question, you can go on the website and you can see some of the sample questions. And this one is asking students to evaluate internet search results. They're trying to figure out about how to become a citizen, which one of these would be the best kind of site to visit. This is another example, and I just picked the 2 sample questions that were at the top of what they are sharing publicly. This one is a constructed response where students are actually writing something in it, and they're asked to create a rule regarding an issue at their school, and then they're asked to talk about how it solves the problem, and then how does it remain fair for all students. So at the national level, we have the NAEP test. We have some organizations that are both advocacy as well as support for educators. And we sometimes have some national funds. Okay, I'm throwing a lot at you, but I'm going to keep going because we will have a question and answer. So I'm going to go back to California. So one of the things that California has done, I think it was adopted in 2020. So but it was started a little bit before that, so some people were working on it, we have a California Civic Seal of Engagement. So the Civic Seal of Engagement in California it's modeled after some other seals that California students can get. And what it is so there was a seal of biliteracy. And so before the California Seal of Civic Engagement. So the Seal of Biliteracy, if a student met particular criterion at the end of their, when they graduated, they would get a seal on their diploma and saying that they were biliterate and they had met these criteria, and they that might help open doors, but also acknowledged the work that they had done. And so this is acknowledging for students the work that they have done in becoming civically literate and knowledgeable and active. So I'm going to skip over the first paragraph and go, it is the intent of the legislature to establish that's what it is. It's state seal of civic engagement to encourage and create pathways for pupils in elementary and secondary schools to become civically engaged in democratic governmental institutions at the local, state, and national levels. So that is its intent. It's civics ed. And these are the criterion, again, lots of words, But now what happens is these are the criteria that the state has set, and then a district will create criteria that will work for their local district. Now, sometimes it's the exact same criteria, but sometimes there's some changes. So I'm gonna like right now we're working with Jefferson Union, which is in Daly City, on creating their seal of engagement, and they are piloting some curricula, etc. But one of their I will make 2 points about the seal of civic engagement. We see it as an opportunity to get more civic learning into schools. Because when you have this kind of administrative structure, this policy move, more people are open to how do we do this. We also see it as we don't want it just to be the seal of engagement just for students who can do everything after school, who can have their adults take them places. They can figure out how to do this. We want to embed it in the school day so there's equality of opportunity to engage with civic learning and to earn this seal. So the first criterion is to be engaged in academic work in a productive way. The second one is demonstrating a competent understanding of the U.S. and California constitutions, the functions and governance of local governments, tribal government structures and organizations, the role of the citizen in a constitutional democracy, and democratic principles, concepts, and processes. The third one, I think, is the meat. It's the biggest the biggest, most difficult one to implement, and also maybe the most important. To participate in one or more informed civic engagement projects that address real-world problems and require students to identify and inquire into civic needs or problems, consider varied responses, take action, and reflect on efforts. And the last one is demonstrating civic knowledge, skills, and dispositions through self-reflection. And exhibiting character traits. 4 and 5, a lot of districts do together, that they are creating tasks for students where their students are reflecting, and then they're also showing their character traits that reflect civic mindedness and a commitment to positively impact the classroom, school, community, and or society. So again, this is a lot, right? And we're talking about teachers who already have a pretty full table of what to teach, and so how to integrate this. I pulled out the pieces of that civic engagement project, which you can see: identifying, investigating, considering, taking action, and reflecting on efforts. That's what we're talking about doing. Here is, again, Watsonville High students who they were concerned with the issue of food waste, and they figured out what they could do, and they are now, this is actually from some years prior, but they partnered with grocery outlet to gather food that would otherwise be disposed of and distribute it. I'm worried about time, so let me, see, yeah, so let me, okay, so both national and state acknowledge this. I'm going to share with you some quotes from some researchers, that every student engages in civic thought already, even if they don't know what it is. And then we need to emphasize the need to listen to youth. When it comes to civic beliefs, concerns, and hopes, young people have a lot to say, right? You've seen that in the national news, if not the local. Not only do young people have a lot to say, they voice their civic beliefs in myriad ways. So I pulled an example from the last month, which this is from, they're using social media, and this is from A Day Without Immigrants, which was, right, 10 days ago. So here is an organization that's on Instagram, a social media platform where there's a lot of youth organizing happening. This is an organization that's an adult organization, but then we said, we're amplifying this youth-led action. And they continue to go, this is youth-led and not organized by us. We reposted a younger person who was informing everyone of this action. So they're not naming the younger person, but they're saying, hey, the kids are coming up with this. And it was about walking out for that day, the protest for immigrant rights, A Day Without Immigrants. And here's the front page of the local paper. you can see it is young people who are leading this action. So again, young people doing things already. And I wanted to point out, and we could, that Salinas Union High School District was one of the first districts to get the Civic Seal up and running. And they are now, if I'd had more time and I got a little sick last night, I would have found some more examples from Salinas, but they are having students are engaging in speeches through the Mikvah project, but it took a while to get there. But Salinas and my colleague Mark Gomez is key to this. We helped him when he was working. We worked together when he was working in Salinas, working on this civic engagement. But this is some of the ways that they made it, that they started making it happen in Salinas. And then I guess the last thing that I'll do is say I wanted to also locally in Monterey County, there's a lot of work being done on media literacy. And I'm going to just give you a piece of the importance of media literacy, right? If we go back up to this one, if you are investigating civic needs or problems and considering varied responses, you need to be able to discern fact from lie. And so one of the things we've been working with a teacher research group for the last 4 or 5 years, that they come from different parts of California, and working on helping students build the knowledge and skills to critically engage with media as consumers, so critical readers, so they can tell, they have skills to figure out what is true and what is not. Curators, so they don't spread misinformation, or they think about what they are doing and whether it's worthy of being spread and in the public forum that is the internet at this point. And producers, creating content and informing others. Part of the curriculum that we've created that teachers have used is just this question of like, what is news? And this is one of the key things that we find is helpful for getting stuff into the classroom is like, this is about a 5-minute video and it just lays it out and it's kid friendly. And it comes from curriculum materials that we didn't create, but we recognize it. And obviously, if we're talking about civics, like news is important, and knowing what news is and where to get it. I'm going to quote, this is from Jeffrey Mall in Quill Magazine, and he says one of the things about news and what journalists do. He says, journalists, though, claim to use First Amendment rights of free speech and a free press for a specific purpose. We have an unstated agreement with our readers, viewers, and listeners that we're providing them with reliable, accurate, and fair information. It's the responsibility involved in our work that makes us different. It's intent that defines a journalist. So you'll see that journalists, when they make a mistake, they correct it. That's one thing that we use to help students see that. And then we'll go back to the founders about how important news is to democracy. And I am going to say that in this case, when we talk civics, we're talking teaching democracy. Even we're talking teaching multiracial democracy, even with its faults and its flaws. So here's Thomas Jefferson writing to Edward Carrington in 1787, and he says, were it left to me to decide whether we should have a government without newspapers or newspapers without a government, I should not hesitate a moment to prefer the latter. But I should mean that every man should receive those papers and be capable of reading them. So media literacy as a key thing to civics is something that's happening in your area. It's happening on the internet. And I kind of put in here, these are some freely available, again, just like the Educating for American Democracy, freely available sources that are created in collaboration between scholars and sometimes teachers, media analysts, etc. And these are all free and accessible. And then you might have seen this nice piece about Monterey County's new Media Literacy Coalition. But we can share this link to this and you can find information about this if you are interested. But these are kids, they're students from 7 high schools that came together to do a day on media literacy. And we will be doing that again in the fall. And there's other initiatives coming out of there. So then I will just close my remarks with my last slide from the great John Lewis, a quote from him. He says, When you see something that is not right, you must say something. You must do something. Democracy is not a state, it is an act. And each generation must do its part to help build what we call the beloved community, a nation and world society at peace with itself. So thank you for your interest in civics. Thank you for what you do. Maybe you all have questions or comments.
So we'll ask Sharon Miller first to unmute.
My question had to do with the fact that the civics engagement seal was started 2017, and I wonder how many students, how many grads in California have gotten that seal, because I've been hearing about it and I just don't know if many have gotten it yet. I hope so.
Um, Yeah, it actually was started in 2020, and so they didn't give it out till a little later. And the data is on the California website, so I'm seeing if I can just pull it up because I don't. You'll see that in our area there aren't as many students who have earned it. It's very there's a lot of students in like Riverside. It's very spotty across the state, and I think that one of the things to remember is that like just reading hearing what that California Civic Seal of Engagement, like that's a big push. um and so um like we would anticipate that it would take a while for it to actually districts to be making that opportunity available for students, because the nature of schooling, there's a lot of initiatives and there's a lot of requirements. Um, but yeah, I can find the data. It is publicly available for last year and then over time. Um, and I didn't actually in 2020 a report also came out. So now that's 5 years ago. But they did find that in a survey across the state that civic and democratic goals are marginal to districts' missions, and they're not in the accountability plans, which every district has an accountability plan. Like Salinas put the Civic Seal of Engagement and civic learning in their accountability plan, which means that there's more, there's more energy and there's more like, did we do this? So that's one of the things that we try to help districts see is if you can put it in your local control accountability plan, then you're going to get more support and from the district at large, and you're going to stay on track.
Okay, I see Susan Meister has checked in.
But I'm glad to see that you have Daisy Miller as your presenter today. I'm sure she may have mentioned that she's a member of the Media Literacy Coalition. If she didn't, I want to say that she's one of our charter members, and the excellence with which she directs her program at UC Santa Cruz has rubbed off on us, and the excellence with which we've been able to pursue our program. I think you probably all know that for some time, the media spectrum across the board has been a factor in creating the most polarized information climate we have ever had. And watching this from a journalist's point of view, last year, I thought that we need to do something about this to make this a community conversation. And thus the idea of forming a coalition came to me, an interdisciplinary group of outstanding people. They come from legislation, education, library science, journalism, of course, and even one is a public official. And we have had a number of programs in the works now. Last year, we did a program called Misinfo Day in partnership with the University of Washington. It was an audience that we know the League is very concerned with, and that is young voters. As they begin to make their choices for the society they want to live in, they need to have appropriate information. And information is no longer the currency of trust. It's, I'm afraid, up to us to be able to separate fact from fiction, and that's what our initiative hopes to do. We have several events coming up that we hope you'll want to join in. One is on March 1st. It's at the Carmel Foundation, and it's an assembly of news editors from across the Central Coast talking about the vital role of news editors and making sure that the information they release is reliable. And on April 3rd, there's going to be a wonderful event co-sponsored by the Carmel Library Foundation Jevin West, who is a professor at the University of Washington and the co-founder of the Center for an Informed Public, and one of the most entertaining speakers you'll ever see, is going to be there in the evening. And you can get tickets, they're free, from the Carmel Library Foundation, but the seating will probably be limited. It is at the Carmel High School Performing Arts Center, but we expect a capacity crowd there, and we hope you'll join us. The League is really a natural ally of ours, in the sense that a great deal of your mission is educating voters. And so if we all join into this effort, it's possible that one day we will have an information climate that we can trust. And that's our goal. So thanks for letting me talk a little bit about the coalition today. And Daisy, thank you for being on this program, and I hope representing the coalition.
Thanks, Susan. Yes, I gave us a shout out and I showed the picture and talked about the importance of news. Yeah, so yeah, it's pleasure work. It's exciting what Susan is leading, and I hope that you can make it to some of those events.
Wow, we got a lot of stuff to process before our voter service meeting next.
Marianne asks about test results or other time series information about civics literacy in adults, say over the past 30 years. So I just put in the link that it doesn't go back 30 years, but on that website, you can see like underneath how did students perform in civics, you can display between 1998 to 2022. Gosh, so that is over the past 30 years, actually. And it really hasn't changed much, but it went up for a little while. But again, this is one kind of test.
Want to ask Susan if you're going to have a really important panel sometime of TikTok influencers.
Well, we're actually tackling the topic from an all media spectrum. Of course, the internet has been a huge factor in the problem in the information environment. And Jevin West at his Carmel Library Foundation event will certainly address that. It's troubling and it's significant, and we're doing our best to incorporate that in our activities as well.
And I might just say that it's not all negative. So you can also Google the Pew Research Center about where young people 12 to 18 get their news, that it was they've updated their data from 2024 in the fall. But I am on all those social media platforms, and there is news that comes across there that it beats the other news. There is also misinformation, but there are ways that students are connecting. And so I think it's easy to say, oh, it's all not good. It basically requires the same kinds of skills that as some of them. There's overlap of skills that people have to use as they Google and use Bing to search for news. So, and many of the news sites are on TikTok at this point, and doing short pieces. So I just want to, we frequently go into spaces where social media platforms are dinged as only negative, and I question that. I think that they are public spaces and we need to learn how to navigate those public spaces, but there are things that happen there that sometimes then make it into the print media, and they weren't getting in there until people on TikTok were going, why am I not hearing about this? So, I don't know, Sharon, about advising. I mean, it's a time suck.
Can you tell us what you see as really best practices for both teachers and high school students that they're really excited about? That's been my question, is what gets them excited from all these things? Don't give me 15. 1 or 2 would be great.
Okay, I might change this tomorrow, but I'll give you 2. One is
Great.
the act of interrogating, of investigating, of inquiry. And adolescents like to question. So it's and also a lot of my work is on how to read historically, but that notion that we have to ask, like, where this come from and what's the agenda, and like that stuff is interesting to students. as opposed to learn this information. And in the act of investigating, you often have to learn more information, right? And the other thing that I think I would say in this moment of time is connecting to the world as they live in it. So like, what is it? Like, students are coming in, they do have some concerns. Maybe it's about how their school is run, maybe it's about the rule about the dress code, right? But maybe it's also about climate change. And so like sort of finding out what it is that they bring into the classroom and comes from their own community. So those are two that I would push, but I would, even while I say that, it's also interesting to students to learn about things that they never thought about. So I'm not saying that all of it should be stuff that comes from their own experience, but that is a way in.
Professor Martin, how do you keep up your optimism? I watch a lot of lectures by Akil Reed Amar, for a professor at Yale, who's always introduced as the nation's foremost constitutional scholar. And when I see him now, I just think, why are people even taking his courses? I mean, if you want to know what's going on in this country, you're not reading the Constitution, you're over taking a political science class because they're describing what people are actually doing. And that just seems very discouraging.
I carry around the Constitution in my. I have been teaching democracy for years. I know that in the past there have been huge injustices that people have continued to fight against, right? Like, this is unprecedented and it is new, but it is also like we have models of people who have continued to fight to free themselves from an institution of slavery. But that's kind of the intellectual piece. I would say like community matters, like connecting with your community, whoever it might be, right? That helps my optimism. And doing small tasks. You do small things, and I think that the science on this is clear. It makes you feel better, whatever range it is. So I do those. Like, I am from calling to, like, I was like, well, I'm going to go talk to the League of Women Voters. Like, that counts as doing something, so that you acknowledge that you may already be doing things, and whatever you can do, it counts. All of it counts. So I think finding those small ways to go, I did something today, or I did something this week. I think that's important right now. And I'm going back to basic principles. It was not a mistake that I mentioned checks and balance and power of the purse. Rule of law, right? Rule of law is fundamental. It is the most fundamental, right? And why is it that we don't understand that this is not a rule of kings and it's not a rule of courts? So, so you being here counts, I think you have to give yourself credit for doing what you can do, and then take care of yourself. Yeah. I also have after the first week or two, I went, okay, I need to change how I consume media, because I've been here before. I've been through this before. So I changed. And by 7 days later, I was like, okay, I need to reflect again, because I'm going to be intentional. I'm going to pause and be intentional about where I get my news, when I get my news, and what I can take.
Well, thank you very much. I think we can conclude this meeting on an uplifting note, and we certainly thank Professor Martin and Susan Meister for your contributions. And so thank you very much, everyone.